My name is Leo Casey. I'm Executive Director of the Albert Schenker Institute, which is proud today to host this book conversation with Stan Litow, the author, and Randy Weingarten. Let me first begin by introducing Stan and Randy. Stan is a member of the Schenker Institute board. And he is a former deputy schools chancellor in the New York City Public Schools. After his time there, he was head of the IBM Foundation. And in that role, he played a central role in the conception and the launch of the P-TECH schools, which are the subject of his book today. We're very happy that Stan could join us. And his interlocutor for this afternoon will be Randy Weingarten, my friend, who you all know as the president of the 1.7 million member American Federation of Teachers, and also the president of the Albert Schenker Institute, and a longtime advocate of career technical education, which is central to Stan's book and today's conversation. 2 housekeeping items before we proceed to Randy. First, you can obtain a copy of the book by pre-ordering it at 15% discount. If you look in your chat, you will see a link that allows you to do that. We always try to get our audience a discount on the books that we bring to you for conversation. And so that will be available. The second is that at the end, towards the end of our hour, we will take some questions from the audience. And the way to do that is to write your question in the Q&A function on the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will take the questions out of that function. And so now, without any further ado, let me turn over the floor to Randy Weingarten.
And I am so glad to be with 2 of my dear, and I think we can actually now say, decades-based friendships with both Leo and with Stan. And look, it's great that we're still in this fight. And I am in actually a hotel room in Syracuse, New York right now, because I've been in the midst of doing school visits now that I'm fully vaxxed. And there's been this amazing joy of being back in school. And as I kind of asked Stan a bunch of questions, one of the things that's been so interesting is that I would say that Stan, who I've known from before he was the deputy chancellor of the city school system of the city of New York, he founded one of the first not-for-profits that actually really focused on what we need to do to for kids to thrive in public education. And Stan, in thinking about the speech I just gave last week about reopen, recover, and reimagine, I started thinking about the work that you did way back then in the aftermath of the 70s fiscal crisis, about what we needed to do for every single school to be a place parents wanted to send their kids, educators wanted to work, kids thrived. I don't think I used the word thrive back then. And that at the same exact time as we have been thinking about how you help all kids, particularly poor kids, particularly Black, Brown, Asian, Indigenous kids, both of us, in some ways on separate tracks, have gotten to the point of how important CTE is, career tech ed is. And one of the things that I said in the speech, and you see it in the P-TECH schools, is that if you look at graduation rates right now, the graduation rates for career tech ed schools are higher than the graduation rates from regular
Yeah.
academic high schools. And part of that, and kids actually like that experience better. And one of the reasons is because of project-based learning, and that they can see and conceive in a very tangible way, not just a marketable skill at the end of some kind of pathway, but it's also all of the skills that we are so important in terms of kids learning: teamwork, critical thinking, solving problems. And so, if you think about both of our kind of work in this field, the fact that we have both started in a very academic way and also have said, no, we also need to have this kind of career pathway, and we need to do problem solving in a very, very tangible way. And frankly, I think that's what your book, Breaking Barriers, using the P-TECH model as an example, that's what your book is about in terms of how we use education, career tech ed, but use education as a way of helping students, young adults, problem solve, and as a result, get incredibly into their learning process themselves. And so I'm really delighted to be here with you. And I'm going to kind of start, Stan, just by saying, why'd you write the book? What is P-TECH and why'd you write the book? And then I'll do other kinds of things. But I want to give you like an opening to say anything you want to say.
Well, thank you so much, Randy. And we do go way back. And one of the great things about our relationship is, we were across the table negotiating contracts, and there was a lot of ways that we could have been adversaries. But I think we recognize the importance of coming together to achieve change. And when we had differences, we found ways to work them out. I think these are important lessons for our entire society, that if you believe in the same goal, all children should learn and achieve, then we can have differences, but we can come together because we do have the same goal. And the thing that's interesting about P-TECH is it started off as an innovation. People asked back 10 years ago, could large numbers of companies hire more people who were graduating with a high school diploma? And it was clear to me at that point, with changes that were happening in the economy, that that was not likely to happen, that there were job opportunities for people with a high school diploma, but those were not jobs that paid at the rate that would provide a real middle class wage for students, whether they were low income, middle income, any income, white, Black, you name it, that we had to find a way to get more students a post-secondary degree. And when we looked at it, we found that high school graduation rates had increased markedly over a 20-year period, but college completion rates had not. And then the question was, how would you do that? How could you achieve that? So the innovation was a grade 9 to 14 school. Don't send kids away at grade 12 with a high school diploma and hope that they would complete college, but integrate high school and college together so that students would receive both a high school diploma and a community college degree. And they would also have a pathway from school to college to career. And at 10 years, roughly 10 years after this program began, from one school in Crown Heights in Brooklyn, across from one of the most challenged public housing projects in the city, there are now about 260 schools across 28 countries, 12 states. How many innovative initiatives started in a low-income community in Brooklyn and have now spread to 28 countries around the world? And the answer is none. So I wanted to tell the story in a book. I wanted to tell the story not just from a policy standpoint, but by telling the individual stories of students We all believe that every student can succeed. Well, the book tells the story that every student can succeed through the lens of Oscar Tadilla. Oscar was 2 years behind in grade 8, didn't think he would complete high school, let alone college, and completed the 6-year program in 3.5 years, got a full scholarship to Cornell, and is now graduating this month from Cornell with his bachelor's degree. And that would not have happened without P-TECH. Oscar's story, and there are many others, are the story in the book. So I can talk about it from a policy standpoint. You can too, Randy. But when we meet people like that, that's the story. And that's why the book, I think, is an important book for people to read.
And I want to, I'm so grateful for you writing the book, Stan. And I want to drill down on a few of the things that you just said, because, so the first thing I want to drill down on is, more of a personal piece before I get into the policy pieces. What made you, I know why Leo and myself love career tech ed. We both taught at what was an old Volk school called Clara Barton for the health professions in Brooklyn. And we taught, we were lucky enough to teach AP Gov. And our kids did really well, superbly, in, contesting and debating the Bill of Rights with a whole bunch of people from kids from affluent schools. But we also really fought to keep that school alive, and the nursing programs alive, and the health and the dental assistant programs alive, things like that. But at a time when both the, between the budget issues, but also policy issues kind of mitigated against this. You came out of some of the same traditions as we did about, academic high schools are key and going to college is key. And I'm not dismissing any of that. But what made you think, because this was your genius, about the kind of connection between creating a school in Brooklyn called, Pathways in Technology, Early College High Schools, and IBM? What, pull the curtain so that people see that genius of that idea.
Well, I think the thing about my career at moving out of education into IBM and seeing in the growth of the information technology industry and seeing opportunity for huge numbers of jobs at high wages, opportunity for real career involvement, career enhancement. And why was it that those opportunities were largely being provided to middle income, upper income, and white Americans, and more males than females? Why was that? It was because there really wasn't a pipeline that provided equity for all. You and I have talked about it shouldn't be about your zip code, right? And what we've seen in our high schools and in our schools across the United States is, after Brown versus Board of Education, we've seen in many ways our schools are very segregated. And the best opportunities and the most creative opportunities are very often with a screen so that some students get them and not all students get them. So I thought that what was important is that if we were going to create a new opportunity for opportunities in the information technology industry, not just for 2-year degrees. Some kids could come in with a 2-year degree. Some could go in and get a 4-year degree. Some could get a graduate degree. They could move up the food chain and they could get really high wage jobs. They could really have jobs and careers that would be very significant and very important. Why should that only be available for some kids? So take away the screen of admissions. Say, you know what, this is an opportunity and it's going to be for all students. That school in Brooklyn over 10 years, hasn't had one white student in the school. And there's no screen for admissions. Any student can get in. And large numbers of them had academic problems. But because of the model, because of a scope and sequence that combined high school and college, because of access to a mentor, paid internships, all of those work experiences that you talked about, project-based learning and innovative, support systems, and a culture in the building that says every student will achieve. And that's communicated by every teacher in the building. So what do we look at 10 years later? We say the school has college completion rates that are 400% higher than the national average. Not one student has ever taken a remedial class. So blow away the notion that a screen for admissions is essential, because if a student is not doing well in grade 8, send them through a different door. They're not going to have a high wage career. They can't do the kinds of things that people who score well on a test or have good grades. P-TECH blows that away and says, if you want an innovative opportunity, you can provide it to every single student.
So let me ask you, you just actually answered the next question I was going to ask about why no admission screening was so important. And we see that, think about this, Dan. Stuyvesant High School in New York, and sorry for everybody who's watching if we're being a little parochial about New York, my apologies, but we all come from New York City and that tradition. But Stuyvesant High School in New York, screening this year, 8 students who were African American got in,
right?
20 students who were Latino.
Right.
That certainly doesn't long-term help in terms of diversity and inclusion. And
right.
Yet, you think about what you just said about the college completion rates from the P-TECH school in Crown Heights. No admissions screening, and you see that huge success in terms of college completion. So the question is, I know the school in Crown Heights was really kind of like first in show and was kind of like your baby and your model. What about the other 260 schools in the other 20 countries? Are you seeing the same kind of ability to diversify, or same kind of, data on diversity and inclusion? Talk about that a little bit.
Absolutely. In the school in Colorado, in Longmont, Colorado, the population of the school is largely Latinx students, most of them immigrant students from Mexico and other Latin American geographies. And the completion rates for those students were very, very low. But the completion rates at the P-TECH school with that population, with the same open enrollment, the same kind of concept, is producing the same kind of results. If you talk to the superintendent, Don Haddad, who I quote a lot in the book, and with my co-author, Tina Kelly, that's an example that is just as powerful as the Crown Heights example. In Newburgh, New York, there was a documentary on PBS that highlighted Newburgh because it had the highest drug and crime rates in the entire state of New York. But with a challenged population, today is their graduation. They're getting diplomas and degrees from SUNY Orange. And 2/3 of the graduates from the college with a degree in cybersecurity come from that one P-TECH school with that challenged population. An entry-level wage for somebody with a degree in cybersecurity could be $75,000, $80,000 a year. And these are opportunities that are being provided to students in Texas, in Colorado, in Louisiana, in New York, in geographies outside the United States. It blows away the notion that innovative school models are available only for some students. This says that every student can succeed if we have a culture in the building that says they will, and the supports that will support them in that way. And you look at the success of that school in Brooklyn, they have the second highest teacher attendance of any school in New York City. And the teachers are just as motivated as the students because they're involved in decision making.
So that gets me to, and as you were saying that about cybersecurity, Stan, I was just reflecting back on a school I saw yesterday. I was in Providence, Rhode Island, and at the Sanchez Education Center, and went into a coding course. Now, these are high school kids. They know more about coding today than I will ever know in my life. And as they were doing it, and they were talking about how they're creating a pathway for cybersecurity. And and these kids, watching them, I'm watching how excited they were. I'm watching how excited the teacher was, female teacher. It was just awesome. And as you were talking about it, I'm like, oh, picture, right back into a high school right now in those pathways. So, but it does get us to, issue of teacher workforce. Mm-hmm. And the diversity of the teacher workforce has been a really important value, or important piece of policy that you've championed for a very long time. It's something, and Leo, when Leo introduced you, you're on the Shanker board. It's something that the Shanker Institute has thought about and done a study about, because what we've seen, and COVID may change this now, but what we saw in the several years, as in the last 5 years, we've actually seen us losing the battle on diversity and inclusion of the workforce, as opposed to winning that battle and having to be much more intentional about how we diversify the teaching force, both in terms of gender as well as race and ethnicity. So you talk about things like recruiting career changers, what you call near retirees, people who have, computer skills and workplace study skills. And I'm sure some of the people who are listening, would agree with that, obviously, but just what's the theory underneath that? And, and why is that so important, including kind of like near retirees, which is a very interesting concept.
Well, the theory is that students will achieve if teachers and principals look more like the population of students in the school. And the P-TECH schools really achieve that, whether it's in Colorado or in Louisiana or in Baltimore or in New York City or in a variety of geographies. And making a concerted effort to do that has increased the opportunity for students to learn at higher levels. And we look at the principals of the schools. Karen Amaker, an African-American woman, Armando Rodriguez in Chicago, a Latinx man, Rashid Davis, the founding principal of the Brooklyn School, a legend. So having faculty and having principals and having administrators look like the students makes a real difference. And one of the arguments in the book is that that needs to be something that we pay a lot more attention to. There are a lot of people who are looking for second career opportunities. Many of those people no longer need the really highly competitive wage, and they can get into teaching as a second career. And that's an opportunity to bring those people into the workforce and make sure that we've got more people with the right skill set and also look more like the students. But that diversity isn't only about the building, it's about the entire society. We've got companies that are now signing up to increase their hiring of people who are diverse. But they're not going to be able to do that without a pipeline that gets people up into the workforce. And from an executive standpoint, they're really going to have to do something that allows those people to have career opportunities to become executives. A great company like Microsoft, only 2.6% of their executives are Black. So how are you going to be able to do that? You're going to have to recruit in people of color. You're going to have to give them the kinds of skills that they need, and not to stay in entry-level jobs, but to provide the real career pathway that's going to bring them up for real achievement in the private sector, in all areas of endeavor. And those are the things, the barriers that we have had. But P-TECH breaks those barriers down and says, you believe in diversity? Everybody is talking about it, making pledges. How do you meet those pledges? You do it by changing the pipeline and supporting a program and an effort like P-TECH, which isn't available. It's great that it went from one school to 260 schools in 10 years, but there's no limit if we look at our future and say, diversity and inclusion isn't something that's going to go away. It's got to be something that's part of the American fabric.
So, and the more, speaking of culture, which you raised before, I'm like writing some notes down and trying to kind of adjust my questions accordingly. But you talked about culture and supports diversity as, which are building blocks in some ways, not just in every school, but frankly, in every one of our governing institutions in terms of changing, hearts and minds. But the more you have a diverse workforce, the more it changes culture. I think that most of us understand why the supports are important. Most of us who are involved in schools and people who are listening to the Zoom. But talk about the importance of culture for a minute. Because I think, there is that saying that, culture eats strategy for lunch. But, talk about why culture and changing culture is so important.
Well, I think it's important because the culture in a P-TECH building starts off when students begin their first day in the school, and they're told, you're not in high school, you're in college. You've been admitted into college. This is a program that is high school and college together. You're in college. And a lot of the students sort of look around and they think, wait, I'm 13 or 14 years old and I'm starting grade 9 and I'm in college. I can think about my future in a very, very different way. And it's not just the high achieving students that are thinking about being in college. It's like all students. And that's the culture in the building. And everybody that they come in contact with says, you can achieve your college degree. And we will provide the supports to be able to get you there. And that's part of the culture. It's not just we're going to set a high bar, but we're going to help you achieve that bar and go further. And that culture about diversity and inclusion, and everyone will succeed, and everyone will support you to be able to get there, is critically important. That mentoring that students get, structured workplace visits where they have an opportunity to go into a workplace and not just view it as if you were going to see something, but participate in project-based learning opportunities, and then have a paid internship at $16 an hour between your junior and senior year in high school. A lot of the companies that are involved in P-TECH, and there are over 600 of them, didn't hire interns who were in high school. They only hired interns who were in college. But this change in experience gave people an opportunity to see the potential in young people, as they grow and develop. And then they provided the support system to be able to grow and to be able to achieve. That's part of a culture in education that needs to be offered to every student. Not to say, some students can succeed, but you should, think about lowering your expectations because of your income level, or because of your race, or because you happen to be homeless, or you had a variety of different problems. There's one example in the school of a special needs student, a kid with an IEP. Most kids with an IEP may not finish high school. This student not only got his high school degree, but got his college degree, got a high-paying job at IBM, being promoted. And that IEP wasn't a barrier, because the culture said, you're going to succeed and we're going to help you succeed.
So high expectations, support, changing the culture to a can do instead of cannot do, having it be shared where people really believe in the belief system, having diversity, so there are people that look like each other. And so there's at least a sense of a lived experience together, because we've all seen that in terms of research, how important it is. And there's one more element, which is the link to opportunities and to future success. So companies like IBM, Thompson Reuters, Tesla, all mentioned in the book. I'm sure I've forgotten some, or, but why don't you talk a little bit about what that career nexus was? What was the opportunity that P-Tech graduates got from IBM, and how has that been seeded in terms of other places?
Well, I think it's when P-Tech started, there were companies that were saying we have a skills crisis. We need more people with the right skills to hire those people. And then, what companies were doing is they were just getting at the top and bidding for the best talent that was coming out of Harvard, MIT, Stanford, you name it, and said, well, we don't have anything to do until somebody walks out the door with a bachelor's or a master's or a doctorate, and then we can be in a bidding contest to try to get the top talent. What P-Tech said to those companies, with IBM starting off in the lead, but then all these other companies now following, is saying, if you want that result, you have to be part of the process. You can't wait to hire the top talent and bid against your competitors. Build that talent from the ground up. And that was a skill that they had to learn and that they had to change. And it's amazing because it was something that was embedded in the population of employees in the companies, because they don't want to work for a company that doesn't have a belief in community and society. So when you're recruiting people to be mentors, you didn't have problems. You had lots of people that wanted to be engaged. When you had people who were supervising interns, they not only supervised them, but they wanted to mentor them. They wanted to help them in the next stage in their career. So the private sector, there's plenty of bad behavior in the private sector, but this appealed to people wanting to achieve at a higher level, and they would get the results in building into their workforce a talent that really could change the company. If you look at the young people that IBM has hired from that school in Brooklyn, not one of them was white. And many of them are on a very clear career trajectory. But I wanted to hit one other point, Randy, that you raised about what were the other things about the success. When we look at innovations in education, a lot of people are looking from the outside to design something without the engagement of the most important stakeholders, teachers, parents, principals, because they've gone to school and maybe they have a lot of money. They think that they can have the ticket to innovation. You know, there are other books written about Mark Zuckerberg in New Jersey, and not really understanding what it is to bring about real change. The thing that was different about P-TECH from the get-go was, here's an innovation, but don't build it where you have the most important players outside of the tent. Bring them into the tent, because you will benefit from their knowledge, their experience, and ultimately they won't be a barrier to bringing it to scale and making it sustainable. They will be part of that effort. So the thing that's different, and it's explained in the book, is that this isn't change from the top. This builds support from the bottom up, and all the critical stakeholders engaged and involved in P-TECH have been part of it from the get-go. And they were people who were helpful in getting the Perkins Act reformed, the teachers, the principals, the civil rights organizations, the parent organizations, the student organizations. And that's a lesson about school change that a lot of people need to learn. And the P-TECH example says, change isn't only about one exemplary school or 10 exemplary schools. If you want sustainable change, you've got to build a scale-up strategy in from day one. And those people who are the most important stakeholders, they can't be left out, because you will need them. You'll need their knowledge, their skill, and their ability, and you'll need them to take it to scale.
So, I mean, you know, and I remember walking the halls with you and trying to get the Perkins bill passed, and how close we got to it during the, you know, Obama administration. We almost got both those big pieces. We got ESSA done, and we got close on P-TECH, on Perkins. And it was interesting that that was one of the only places where the Trump administration, the Betsy DeVos's of the world, understood how important that was. So, and it's, and the language in Perkins is really wonderful. And frankly, and I said this last week in the speech I gave, the example of what has happened in terms of career tech ed with project-based instruction should prove and show that we need to change the accountability systems to be more about what kids need to know and be able to do in a project-based as opposed to a test-based way. Right. And, you know, and so, and here you have a great example of what happens when you do that. So I know that there's other people that want to ask you questions. So I'm just going to ask the last question I'm going to ask is essentially, what's next? What do we do? You know, what do we do next in terms of this work and the P-TECH work, the career tech ed work? What's next on the horizon for you, Stan, or for us in this work?
Thank you, Randy. I think one of the great things about the growth of this model is that it's enjoyed support from a range of people like yourself, like President Obama, governors, both Republican governors like Governor Hogan, Democrat governors like Governor Hickenlooper, or others that have stood behind it from day one. And one of the great things when President Obama came to this Brooklyn school, and I saw the parents and community members, when they saw him driving into the school, they couldn't believe that he was coming into their neighborhood on Albany Avenue in Crown Heights. What he said at that visit was, this is an opportunity that should be provided to every student. Okay, so now we have maybe 100,000 students around the world who are part of this experience. That's great. It's unique. It's a great achievement, but it's not every student. So how could we provide this opportunity to millions of students? What is the barrier that stands in the way of having a P-TECH school in virtually every high school so that students could have this experience. What's standing in the way? Nothing. If we want it to be at a scale that would meet the expectations that people had for it, we can get there. We can look at our Pell Grants and we can say, well, they should be available for a student who takes college courses when they're on a high school register. When students get federal college work study dollars, when they're in college, even though they're on the high school register, they could be eligible for that and they could get it, so that an internship could be supported with federal dollars. And governors, mayors, school leaders could support the expansion of this program in a very, very significant and large way. So I think, what's the opportunity? The opportunity is to say that our society has changed. We want people with higher skill levels, but we can do it. And not by, saying some kids can succeed and others can't, or saying college doesn't matter. College does matter. I love it when people who are saying, college doesn't matter, but they wouldn't say that about their own kids. College matters, and this is an opportunity to get students a pathway from school to college to career, and this could change the way our country looks, and there's not a barrier standing in the way. We've broken them down. So I think if people read the book and want to help move to the next level, I think there's nothing standing in the way of giving this opportunity, as President Obama said, to every student.
That's fabulous.
So,
Leo, any questions from the audience?
we have some questions. So someone who Stan and Randy and I know from New York once said that collaboration is the elixir of the status quo crowd. And Stan, it seems like the P-TECH is actually that collaboration is how you make change happen. So one of our audience is interested in exactly how are teachers involved in P-TECH in ways that you wouldn't find in ordinary schools?
Well, I would say that they're involved in shaping the project-based learning opportunities. They're engaged and involved in the interaction with people from the industry partners to figure out exactly how to incorporate those skills into how they teach their classes and courses, and get the support from their colleagues to be able to do that. They are given the professional development that they need to be able to grow in their learning and in their development. And they're more engaged and involved in structuring the classes and the courses. They're engaged and involved in structuring the pathway from the scope and sequence of courses connected to the college courses. And they have a lot more interaction with college faculty. Most of the teachers who are in our high schools don't have much contact with colleges at all. And this breaks down those barriers so that the teachers are really more engaged in their own instruction. They're more engaged in the pathway from their courses to the college courses, and they're more involved in the structure of the program overall. And I think that involvement gives them a buy-in and a sense that this is something that's top down. They're part of developing the solutions. And I think that's what leads to a culture in the building where people feel they're not being, lectured to, and they're not, just getting a set of directions that they have to follow. They're part of the process of structuring the program from day one.
I have to remember to unmute myself. Another question that we have is, what do you think of all of the innovations and all of the policies that made P-TECH into what it is? What is the one most important policy that you think a regular public school could take from its experience?
Well, I think the culture in the building is critically important. The culture that every child can learn. And I think one of the things I would say is I wouldn't really cherry pick one item. I think one of the things that's really critically important about this model is that there are certain core elements that are critically important. It doesn't have to be preparing students for jobs in the IT industry. It could be around finance. It could be around education. It could be around social services. It could be in a variety of different areas. But the areas that it's worked so far are only examples of success. Access to mentoring, critically important. But if that's all you do is provide a mentor, it's not enough. Access to the college courses, very, very important. But P-TECH is to a particular degree. Students don't just get an opportunity to take college courses. They get a pathway that gets with an end product, which is a specific degree. So I would say there are things that are more important than others, but what's most important is keeping the integration of all those things together and making sure you deliver on all of those promises.
So this question's a little harder. Given the laudable role of IPM in developing and supporting P-TECH, and your personal leadership at IBM in doing that, is this a model that we could expect other corporations to take up in the same way? Is there a Stan Litow at Apple, at Microsoft, at Google, that would have the same sort of dedication to get this model moving?
I think if you look at the kinds of companies that have been involved in the program, Thomson Reuters, and Randy had mentioned that earlier, that's not an IT company. Thomson Reuters is a very diverse and growing company, and they're getting to the point where they have achieved almost 100 hires from one P-TECH school in Dallas, Texas. And that is a company that's got the support of their employees. I think that the model of what IBM started has spread to other companies. And I think what we're seeing happen is there's been a change happening in the private sector, because as a consequence of George Floyd and a whole range of other disasters that we've experienced in this age of the pandemic, is people are recognizing that they have to do something about the problem of diversity and inclusion. And just making a pledge is not enough. They've got to deliver. So I think we're seeing more leadership in the private sector, and that's encouraging. And we've got to support it and recognize it when people do stand up. I'd written a book before this one about the challenge for business and society, and highlighted the fact that back in the 1950s, IBM was the first company that had integrated a manufacturing plant below the Mason-Dixon line back in the 1950s. That leadership, it doesn't only have to come from one company. That leadership can come in the private sector. It can come in the public sector. We have to demand it, and then we have to recognize it, and then we have to support it and say it's not enough to do it in one company. IBM, Thomson Reuters, Tesla, there were a group of 17 students who graduated from a small school in Buffalo, and Tesla offered jobs to 15 out of the 17 students because they saw the talent that was coming out of the school. So I think we can encourage and get that kind of support from the private sector. It's not going to happen with one, wave of your arm. But we have to demand it, we have to encourage it, and then we have to give them the assistance in collaboration to be able to get there.
Okay, so we have something which is not a question, but it says a huge endorsement of this very important work. We have a network of 37 P-TECHs supported by the State University of New York, and they are making a big difference for the high school and college experience. thank you for amplifying this opportunity to expand as an opportunity to larger numbers of students who deserve this. And so I think one of the questions that comes to mind from this is P-TECH has somehow managed to expand at a very rapid pace while maintaining the sort of quality of the original design. So I mean, often those two don't go hand in hand. The quality questions are questions that networks that expand very slowly manage to do. And there are others that expand rapidly, but they sort of lose fidelity to the original model. So how did you manage those two of those together?
Well, I think that it's important.
That's a good question.
It's important to provide the opportunity for schools to support one another. One of the things that schools get through a site called ptech.org is the opportunity to learn from their colleagues from other schools about project-based learning opportunities that might work, or a scope and sequence that might work, or how to structure a workplace visit so that you don't get just an opportunity to look at something, but really experience something. When people are learning about how to structure an internship to get the most benefit out of it, how do you do that so that it isn't just a summer job, that it's a real learning opportunity for young people? So one of the ways that you can build higher quality across a network is by providing that kind of opportunity for people to learn and grow from one another. And also you need the policy level support. In a state like New York or in Colorado, you have a steering committee where all the key players are engaged and involved. The same is true in Texas, the same is true in Maryland, where you have people at the table to solve those problems together and to collaborate. They're not just changes that have to be made by the industry partner or the higher ed partner or the K-12 partner. They need to be around the table to collaborate and solve these problems together. So I think that's one of the reasons why there has been more strength as it's gone from one school to 20 or 30 to hundreds of schools. But I think it's also important to know that it will not be a success in every school. You'll always have 1, 2, 3, or 4, hopefully no more than single digits of schools but that's not the impediment to expanding the opportunity for large numbers. Yes, have a structure in place to improve those that aren't succeeding, but make a commitment that this is something that is going to go to scale and going to become sustainable, and it is going to change, and you are going to adapt as it grows and changes. But don't be afraid to innovate, but don't dump the innovation down from the top. Engage the people who have to deliver it on a day-to-day basis, because they have the knowledge and experience to be able to help to adjust it and modify it as it goes forward.
Yep. I would remind people, if you have a question, write it in the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen. There is one of the unfortunate legacies of the old vocational education is this idea that it is in opposition to college, that you send students into vocational education when they're not capable of doing college level work. And so it seems like P-TECH has really been founded on a sort of refusal of that idea. How many students from P-TECH who complete your 6-year program, how many of them go on to finish their college? And is that something that, that you encourage in the same way that you would encourage students to go on to work for IBM or Tesla or one of the cooperating corporations?
Yeah, I think that the lesson is that the overwhelming majority of students who get their associate's degree go on and get their bachelor's degree. Overwhelming majority of students. Shudan Brown, who went to the school in Brooklyn, who's featured in the book, went on to get her bachelor's degree, went on to get her master's degree. She's now working at IBM and pursuing a PhD. Now, Shudan Brown is an example, just an example, but there are tens of students who are like Shudan, who are going on and getting their bachelor's, and some of them getting their graduate degree. You know, Morzaleen Mozahid, who got his associate's degree, went on now to get his bachelor's degree from SUNY, and will wind up going to medical school. So this isn't an end. It's empowering the student with the opportunity, and the sky is the limit in terms of their opportunity and next stage. And when some of the students go into the workplace with their associate's degree, like Radcliffe Sadler, who introduced President Obama when he came to speak at the Brooklyn School, Radcliffe went on and got his bachelor's degree while he was working at IBM, got it from Baruch College. So this isn't an end. I mean, it takes down all of the myths about career and technical education, that it's a separate door, that it's not about real career success. The sky's the limit for students. They get their associate's degree, they can go into the workforce, they can go on and get their bachelor's or their master's, they can go on to medical school or law school. And by the way, having skill in IT doesn't mean that you're, only going to have an IT career, or healthcare, that you're only going to have a healthcare career. What we know is that your interests could change, your opportunities could change, but why shouldn't you have all of the opportunity to be able to do anything? And why should it be only some students that get that opportunity? That's what this is all about. There was a lot of resistance to career and technical education from the civil rights community because of the fact that it was not connected to real career opportunity. It was a separate track, and more often than not, that separate track was given to students who came from some neighborhood, some community, and looked a particular kind of way. This blows away all of those myths.
Good. So I think we're approaching the end of our hour. So I'd like to, Randy and Stan, if you have any final comments to our audience, this would be the appropriate time to make them. Randy, you're on mute.
People know in the chat to where they can get the book at a discount. The book is called Breaking Barriers, and it's not just the story of the P-TECH school innovation effort, but it's really the story of how you change culture, how you create support, how you bring business and education together, and how you create all sorts of opportunity for career, for life, for participation, civic participation, college, for young adults, and how you scale it up. So it is one of these, amazing, not just stories, but it's also a real tribute to the work that you've done your whole life and your whole career, Stan, in terms of really helping kids thrive. And I just want to say thank you for sharing this with us. And you get the last word.
Well, Randy, thank you so much for your friendship. Thank you so much for all that you have done to make education really deliver for teachers and for students, for parents and communities. And I think this book and the discussion that we've had and the experience that I've had in having an opportunity to work with you and also work in creating the P-TECH program tells us that education is as important as ever. Everybody always says education is important, and then somehow or other in their thinking or in their action, it moves to the back burner, and the other issues have somehow or other become more important. I'm not saying that there aren't a lot of issues that are important, but every single one of them connects to education. And education reform is the ticket to economic opportunity. It's the ticket to getting out of the pandemic. It's the ticket to success as a nation, as a society in the United States and globally. And this is an opportunity for people to think about how education not can be an aspiration, but it can be the reality of what we can do for all students. I can't thank you enough for your support, Randy, and the AFT and the Shanker Institute. And I look forward to working together to making this reality, that this is something that can be offered to every student, not just some, but every student.
And with that, let me say thank you to our audience for having joined us, and have a good evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.